is this guy has forgotten more about politics than most of us will ever know. He's Michael Shure, everybody. And yes, Michael Shure is there. And then this gentleman is the former senior correspondent for ABC News, longtime White House correspondent as well. Now he can let it fly as a private citizen. He's Jim Avila, everybody. Come on. There you go. Jim, Michael.
Morning, Michael, Mark.
Yeah. So the thing that sees the headlines, and I can ask you both to put this in some kind of context. This week, I thought one of the things that sees the headlines was this revelation that Joe Biden had classified documents in his possession in these various places. First, it was discovered in the office, then it's discovered in his garage. I mean, and then there's another room off the garage, etc. How big a deal is this? And can you put this in some sort of context? There is this special counsel that's been appointed as a result of these revelations. Jim, please, how important?
Well, I mean, I think you have to look at this on two levels. Is it comparable to what Donald Trump is accused of doing? No. Does it look bad? It looks terrible. And practically, it takes some heat off Donald Trump, because now his attorneys can, both in court and in the public opinion court, can say, come on, everybody does it. Biden, who's supposed to be this Mr. Clean, he did it. Donald Trump's no worse than anybody else. It's more of this whataboutism that the Republicans are so good at. And unfortunately, Biden has fallen right into the trap. The amount of material that he has had stocked away in his garage in Wilmington and again in Washington, D.C. in an office is minuscule compared to what Trump had. Secondly, the Justice Department didn't have to go subpoena them. They didn't have to go raid his office or his house. Joe Biden gave those up voluntarily. And perhaps what is fitting into the Republican spin machine is that they didn't report it right away. I mean, they reported it to the government right away. They didn't report it publicly right away. So right after they found the stuff in Washington, D.C., within days, they reported it to the National Archives, which they're supposed to do. But that was also a few days before the midterm elections, and they didn't make it public, and therefore that looks bad that they were trying to hide something. So it's a negative. It's not good, and many people are not going to look at it in a rational fashion. They're going to look at it as whataboutism.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with Jim, and I would just add that the court of public opinion is the one that matters most. It's not the court of law, because the court of law is still going to go after Donald Trump's attorneys, even for defying the subpoena, for hiding it. There was also a lot of the records that were returned to the National Archives by the Trump people were mutilated. Some are still missing and unaccounted for. There are gaps there. So in terms of levels of egregiousness, it's clear that the two are incomparable, even the way it was handled. Like Jim said, the very same day that these were found at the Washington office, they contacted the National Archives that day and said that they were there. Did they come public with it? No, they didn't. And look, I would probably have advised them to not come public with it at that time as well. As long as they were going through the proper protocol, this would come out, and it did. But I also think that, it does sort of limit the impact of what Donald Trump did with his records at Mar-a-Lago, that it becomes less about having the classified documents and more about fighting to keep people there. It's a little bit, Nixonian in that, in that it was about, the cover up more than it was about the crime. And I think that the other part of it that will play is that, somebody's going to come out and say, well, the National Archives has to do a better job as White Houses are winding down in getting in there and making sure that they get all of this material. So I think a little of that blame is going to go to the National Archives, probably from the right, because they're the ones that are probably most hurt by this. It's not something that Joe Biden needed right now. I don't see how it's going to have an enduring effect on President Biden.
It's asked in the chat, and I think it's a reasonable point, and it's essentially the point that Michael Shure is making here the broader point, and I pointed this out yesterday too, sort of, or asked the question, what the hell's going on with classified documents in this country? I mean, we're not aware of where they are. They show up, it seems, everywhere. I mean, I don't feel so bad about how disorganized I am now. I mean, it's crazy. Or it seems as though there is a function of disorganization at the highest levels of our government. And so it was asked in the chat, what are these documents? They can't be that important if literally no one knows where they are and just discovers that they are in the custody of Joe Biden or Joe Biden's people in the case of the most recent revelations. Or now in the case of Trump, I guess he walked away with so many. They were aware that they were after these documents. But even in the case of Trump, there's some specifics as to what documents might still be outstanding that they aren't really sure about.
There are clearly things that are still missing. The National Archives says that there are records that are missing still from the Trump White House, and those blanks have yet to be filled in. And it's a good point that the person who either texted or I'll say they faxed, Mark. I'm going to go with fax in their question and their point is that what is going on here? Well, I mean, there's a lot of mundane classified information that is pertinent at one moment that loses its interest over time as well. And then there's some that are obviously quite important and quite sensitive. And I think that's why the National Archives treats every single piece as important as the next, because it's not up to them to divulge or to discern which is. And both the president and the vice president, and I learned this week, have the power to declassify a document. I didn't know that the vice president could do that as well. So there is that sort of gray area of Donald Trump saying that he declassified all of that. Well, we know that that's not the fact anymore. But again, yes, there has to be a new protocol for how they deal with this. And I think the National Archives is probably going to get into that right away if they haven't already.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems was that in the Trump instance, again, another difference is that they knew stuff was missing because there were important documents they couldn't find, like the personal letter from the North Korean chairman to President Trump. It was missing. That was something very important and something that belonged in history, and also, could be national security. What did he say? How was he flattering the president? Those type of things. In the Biden instance, nobody knew anything was missing because, as far as we know, there was nothing really important that was outstanding that came to the National Archives' attention. Now, who is overseeing this? I don't know how the process works, and that's one of the things that I think a legitimate House inquiry would be, as to how they classify these things, how they move them when one president leaves office and the next one comes in. Who's overseeing that move? I mean, in the Trump instance, it was just guys with boxes carrying him down in a truck down to Mar-a-Lago. They were found, the ones that were found for Biden, at least in the museum or the think tank where he was having them, were obviously being stored there by somebody because they thought they were going to be pertinent to some history or some kind of writing of a memoir. The same thing with questions were asked about Obama because he had a bunch of them moved to Chicago, but that was under the supervision of the National Archives, so there was no issue. So there has to be a delineation here about what's going on with the National Archives and who oversees this movement, because some of those are very important. Some of them have the names of our assets, names of spies, names of people that we've turned in very dangerous countries. And you don't want those out in somebody's closet. Others, as Michael points out, are not that important and should probably have been declassified.
It's an interesting comment from John Schneider. I want to know this. Why are people still using paper? Can't we have all this stuff digital and then secure it? Years from now, people will be saying old people doing old people things. I mean,
well, the archives are actually digitizing, and it goes to the point where we used to build these presidential libraries that they're museums, but they're also built to house all of the records by the National Archives, to house the records of that particular administration. Well, now people are saying, well, why do we need to spend all this money, public money, on housing these records when in fact researchers, historians, fact checkers can use these things digitally even if it has to be on site under the supervision, but you don't need all the space and all, so John makes a good point. But for the moment, these papers do exist, and even once digitized, it's unclear what happens to them. Where should they be stored? Because if digitization fails in some way, at least you have the actual article in cases where that is necessary for history.
Yeah,
you guys,
as one of your listeners just pointed out, Mark, putting things on digital doesn't mean it's secure either. I mean, it's probably maybe less secure if it gets out in that world where who knows. I mean, your bank statements aren't secure anymore. So, that it doesn't necessarily make that a digital thing is going to be much more secure.
And that's the argument the archives are making too.
When I read the Michael Lewis book, The Fifth Risk, and he talked at the beginning of the book about the transition from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, and I learned a lot about the transition process where I thought I'd known a lot, but there was even greater detail that was filled in by the Lewis book. But there's always an incident that brings something else to the center of attention. In this case, it's this document thing. I didn't know this. Like, I didn't know what Michael had pointed out earlier, that the vice president has the power to declassify, or that even these documents would be treated with anything but the utmost care and with the greatest surveillance. And clearly that's not the case. As Jim says, the move is kind of just like you and I might move from apartment to apartment. I mean, it's not supervised in any kind of, it would seem, coherent fashion. And it allows for the sequestering of these documents, or the secreting of these documents. And I'm glad we made the point on this. What's different is that there is an active obfuscation on the part of the Trump team to keep documents, keep them away from the archives, and prevent this process from going on. So that, right away, it seemed like
one of the most serious potential charges is obstruction of justice. And that's only been talked about with Trump. There's no indication that there's any obstruction of justice in the Biden camp as of now. There really is no equivalency. And it's really a shame that somebody, probably not the president, but somebody on his staff, was this sloppy and didn't take care of these things, because now it has the potential of making things easier for Donald Trump in court. I think I disagree with Michael a little bit on this. I think that, yes, the court case is more serious for Donald Trump, and he still has a problem with that. But a jury going in and sitting in the courtroom, all the defense has to say is, well, let's look at seeing what other presidents have done. Well, President Biden had the same problem or similar problem. And therefore, you really can't read President Trump's mind, can you? So let's let him off. I think it poses a real problem in a jury trial.
I do, but I don't think they're going to go out. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. I don't think that's what they're going to be going after. I think they really want to go after his legal team, the Trump legal team, for fighting the subpoena. And It's no moment how many presidents did whatever they did in a case like that. It's the fact that these lawyers defied the court, they defied the Congress, and they didn't provide what needed to be provided. Also,
Martha Stewart went to jail. She lied to the FBI.
Right.
Got to give Trump credit for always being able to find apparently an endless number of attorneys who are ready to lie and break the law on his behalf. I think it's pretty amazing. Yeah. I mean, even the mob runs out of lawyers, but not Donald Trump. It's great. Right. I want to ask you about the business of government now, with the change in leadership, and with when we spoke last time, there was still the speakership very much in doubt. Now, with that resolved, I'm wondering about the business of government, the agenda of the new Congress. Obviously, legislation is pretty much going to run aground because of a divided Congress. But can you speak to where we are on that? Start with you, Michael.
I think that the Republicans have a decision to make, and it's fairly clear what that decision is, as to whether or not they think the brand should be vengeance, and the brand should be sort of treating just because they were treated a certain way, and many feel justifiably that they need to go and turn around and do that. You already hear people saying that Ilhan Omar, the representative from Minnesota, that Eric Swalwell, representative from California, and will not be seated among others on committees. Adam Schiff as well, who was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. So that by doing that, they're just sort of playing that same kind of a game. There were reasons why the last speaker, went after some of those people not to be on committees. And I think when you see them behaving that way, also, the first thing that they do is they bring up abortion. And when you're bringing up abortion early, to me, it makes no sense. I think that the Republican majority in the House would be a lot bigger, and I don't know that they would have one in the Senate were it not for the Dobbs decision. But they are still going into full bore into the abortion issue, which delights Democrats here. But that seems to be what they're going to do. And Hunter Biden and investigations and putting conservatives on the Rules Committee that decide which legislation goes to the floor. You can see them putting look, they have the right to. They're in the majority. But I don't know that the playbook that Kevin McCarthy is using is the one that if I were the Republican leader right now, I would use.
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with the Republican Party. They have no plans. They have no legislation. Jim Jordan has been in Congress for years and has never proposed one piece of legislation in the Congress. He is a rabble rouser, and that's all he's going to do is cause a lot of commotion, a lot of chaos. And is that the Republican brand? It appears to be. It appears that chaos is the Republican brand. We're going to see right away a problem with the debt ceiling, a problem with the government shutdown. The government shutdown means that thousands of people are going to be not paid and not go to work. Parks will be closed again. The army, the military will not be paid. Those type of things are very serious. And that's what they're going to be known for. That's what they're going to be branded for. I think it's a total disaster and a total recipe for losing in 2024. And I think it's a real mistake for them to. And when you say equivalency of going after those Congress people that they're talking about going after, or calling in the head of Homeland Security or Dr. Fauci. There were not investigations of that nature by the Democrats. The investigation by the Democrats was in the January 6th insurrection. That's way up here. What they're talking about is political and only down here, and is really, it makes no sense politically. And I think it's going to damage the country and if they have any brand left, it's going to damage their brand.
I wonder about the degree to which this is sort of the pact with the devil that we saw McCarthy have to make, the degree to which the party is now increasingly, I would say, held hostage, but maybe it's now defined by something different, the GOP. I mean, I get the lower taxes and personal freedoms, but I'm sorry, go ahead. But then
I think you're going to take a sympathetic look at it. You would say that's their problem, and they have to figure that out. And they have a little time to do that, and they have the leadership, and they now have a window in which to do it. We just don't, as Jim outlined, we don't have any indication that they're going to do that. And until you have that, I can't see how this is a good plan for them. But I've been wrong about them many times before. I mean, as recently as probably yesterday. And so they do figure a way out to make things work politically when you can't understand why they're doing that. But I think that act is going to grow old. And I don't think that Kevin McCarthy has a strong enough hold on his caucus to even have that be something that you can, bet on.
Well, their successes have been limited. Their successes have been in packing the courts. That was the number one thing they did. And number two, they gerrymandered states across the country so that they still have some representation, because otherwise they would have been blown out of the water completely. They have about a 35% popularity among.
I totally agree. And I'm just saying their political success allows them to do that, right? And keeping their natural coalitions together, their Christian conservatives, so they can pack the courts. People who held their noses when Donald Trump was an option in the primary, who came out in full force, got their 3 Supreme Court justices in a packed court. So you're right. I totally agree with you. I'm just saying that those political successes matter because they endure.
And as to Mark's point, if you understand the quote unquote, your dad's Republican Party, lower taxes, less restrictions, regulations, those type of things. Okay, where's that plan? I haven't seen a tax plan yet. I haven't seen, there's no talk about doing that. What they've done is, in fact, which is pretty kind of counterproductive, they've decided not to fund the IRS to its maximum so that we're collecting even less taxes from these huge companies and from these millionaires and billionaires who are not paying any taxes. What they're doing, I really do not understand how they ever expect to elect a president again if they keep doing this.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you touch on in this conversation, Michael Shure, we're finishing up with Michael and Jim, the things, and I'm glad you mentioned the court of public opinion, because the court of public opinion matters when it comes to voting. Presuming the votes have legitimacy to them, that we can get the voting system. I think the election system in America is threatened by a lot of this voter intimidation, and there's all sorts of voter suppression going on, in my view, and that for another time. But that the idea that somehow the overturning of Roe and then bringing it up again, as you suggested in this conversation, it keeps it in the public consciousness. I mean, it's a big thing, and for a party that celebrates personal freedom, that's a big freedom that they have taken away, and a big piece of personal privacy they've taken away from a woman. So,
and it hurt them in November. So.
Yes, and it could contaminate their chances again moving forward.
Mark, before we go, I didn't get the email. What's next week's uniform?
I got. By the way,
you got to get one of these.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. Sorry.
That is very strong.
I didn't know we could have writing. I didn't know we could have writing.
I have 400 of these, so I'd be happy to send you a couple of hundred. Okay. Michael is a big Niners fan, Jim Avila, as you're probably aware. I mean, he's a huge Niners fan. He's flown across the country to see the Niners play. Yeah. So this shouldn't be difficult to play the Seahawks. Just give us 30 seconds on that, if you would, please, Michael.
According to my son, who is also an enormous Niners fan, and great thanks to his father, they will win by at least 15 tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's going to happen. I think they're going to control the game. I don't think that the Seattle offense has a way to deal with the 49ers defense.
When do you think, Michael, that, if I can just add on to it, when do you think the lack of a original first-string quarterback, or at least a second-string quarterback, is going to kick in? I don't think it will at Seattle, but I worry about them down the line.
Yeah, I think when they face a real defense, I mean, they're all real defense in the NFL, but when they face the Eagles defense, for example, it's going to be more difficult for Brock Purdy. But, Kyle Shanahan has a plug-and-play offense, right? I mean, you can put anybody in, and they seem to do well, running backs especially. So, if you don't have to be brilliant to hand the ball off. And those
running backs he has are incredible.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Yeah, Christian McCaffrey, that was good.
But I would also say that, look, this kid, Brock Purdy, he's come up in some tough situations, even that first game in which he played on 3rd and long, where you just couldn't hand the ball to Debo, or you just couldn't get the ball to McCaffrey. You had to make a tough pass. He does make them. He wasn't the star of the show. He was the understudy. I get it. But he has really, sung the big songs in the show, to extend the parallel, right, in as good thank you. Well, in as strong a fashion as the starters.
Yeah, and in Niner world, the big question is, what if they make the Super Bowl or the championship game, and what if Jimmy's ready to play? What do you do? So let's see.
Jimmy.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Just because he's very good looking.
Okay.
Right. Isn't that what we were talking about?
I want to lose with the most handsome guy at the helm.
Right.
All right, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Michael Shure, Jim Avila, love talking to you every Friday. Go Niners. Thanks, guys. All right.
Bye-bye.
All right, so long. Jim Avila, Michael Shure, great stuff.